At the start of the 20th century, Britain found its position as a global hegemon waning. While the Royal Navy was the most powerful navy at the time, it was stretched thin, securing British interests around the world. With the rising German naval presence, starting with the Kriegsmarine's rapid expansion beginning in 1898 and increasing pressure from other nations worldwide, the Royal Navy found itself in desperate need of more and newer battleships that would be able to maintain its dominant position and secure its geopolitical interests. At the end of the 19th century, Britain's primary naval concern was not the German Navy, but instead the French and Russian fleets combining. In 1903, First Lord of the Admiralty, Lord Selborne, wrote, "We must have a force which is reasonably calculated to beat France and Russia." This sentiment is reflected by the earlier passing of the 1889 Naval Defence Act, which mandated the British Navy must have at least as many capital ships as the next two largest fleets combined. This would be altered in 1912 by Churchill to merely 60% more than the Germans in the midst of the pre-World War I naval arms race. But by 1900, the British possessed 53 battleships and 17 armored cruisers, a total of 70 capital ships, while the French had 31 battleships and 8 armored cruisers, the Russians 12 battleships and 10 armored cruisers, and the Germans with 18 battleships and 3 armored cruisers. Troublingly for the British, both the Americans, but primarily the Germans, had recently begun rapid expansion of their fleets. The German naval commander at the time, Alfred von Tirpitz, was keen on the rapid expansion of the German Navy to protect its interests abroad and for it to pose as a challenger to the Royal Navy in the North Sea. Tirpitz ordered the construction of 19 battleships, and this number would be revised in 1900 to 38. Not enough to surpass the British fleet, but enough to take the spot as the second largest fleet in the world. On October 20th, 1904, John Fisher, also known as Jackie Fisher, is appointed to the office of First Sea Lord. A lifelong serviceman in the Royal Navy had made Fisher aware of a number of serious threats to British interests. Fisher was a man who desired for the construction of a new age of battleship, one in which speed and firepower were key. With his new position secured, he dramatically altered the Royal Navy, scrapping hundreds of obsolete ships and many older capital ships, saying too weak to fight and too slow to run away. Fisher focused on the implementation of fast, armored, and heavily armed battleships with as many big guns as you could put onto them, capable of outshooting anything they can outrun and outrunning anything they can outshoot. In addition, Fisher reorganized the operational areas of the British fleet, putting a greater emphasis on defending home waters, particularly against the Germans in the North Sea, rather than the previous doctrine of maintaining a large presence in the Mediterranean. The consolidation of the main British fleet, along with its most advanced vessels in this theater, would have devastating consequences in the future. In total, Jackie Fisher turned the Royal Navy into a smaller but far heavier hitting force capable of concentrating its forces to destroy any European naval threat. This was somewhat counteracted by the now weakened naval presence in other theaters. The plans were rapidly drafted up for a brand new type of battleship to match Fisher's new doctrine. The ship's designs were drawn up by February 1905, and while it was launched a year later in February 1906, it wouldn't be commissioned until that December. With a displacement of 17,900 tons, it had 10 12-inch guns, 24 3-inch guns, and thick 11-inch armor plating, able to reach a whopping speed of 21 knots, carrying a crew of almost 700. The Dreadnought was a massive departure from the dominant naval theory at the time. Capital ships were supposed to fight in a line such as in the Age of Sail, firing shots at each other at extremely close ranges guaranteed to hit with a variety of gun calibers. Fisher's new navy focused on firing at the enemy from much further away, firing at the enemy long before they could fire at you, and outrunning any potential threat that may pose a serious risk to the vessel. Taking a moment to compare the Dreadnought to the most modern German battleship at the time, the Deutschland-class battleship. The HMS Dreadnought sailed at roughly 2 knots faster and had 10 12-inch guns compared to the Deutschland's 4 11-inch guns, and possessed about an inch and a half thicker armor and had a greater operational range of around 2,000 miles. The Deutschland was outclassed in every way. With its entry to the seas, every other ship afloat became effectively obsolete. At this point, battleships would largely be classified as pre-dreadnoughts and dreadnoughts, with a few exceptions such as semi-dreadnoughts we will talk about briefly. There are 2 important things to quickly note. The first being the British also laid down 3 Invincible-class armored cruisers, later reclassified as the first of battle cruisers. While lacking Dreadnought's 10 12-inch guns and 11-inch armor, they still possessed 8 12-inch guns and 6-inch armor. Importantly, the Invincible-class ships, Indomitable, Inflexible, and the namesake Invincible, were considerably faster than the Dreadnought, able to steam at 25 knots, arguably a better adaptation of Fisher's philosophy. The second thing to note is that not all ships were equally turned obsolete. While the Dreadnought easily outclassed anything afloat, certain ships, classified as semi-dreadnoughts such as the IJN Satsuma from 1906, possessed 4 12-inch guns and 12 10-inch guns and could steam at 18 knots, or the Italian Regina Elena 1901, which had 2 12-inch guns, 12 8-inch guns, and could steam at 22 knots. These ships were still powerful vessels for the time, with considerable speed and firepower, and while they were certainly outclassed in both categories by the Dreadnought, it would be irresponsible to state that they were entirely obsolete. Ironically, the British actually suffered the most from the invention of the Dreadnought. The British had maintained a level of capital ships greater than the next 2 largest fleets combined, but the Dreadnought effectively reset the list, with the British now only having 1 more modern capital ship than the entire rest of the world combined. If they were to maintain their lead, they would need to act fast and mobilize their dockyards and construction crews. The Germans had already been undergoing a massive naval construction project for almost a decade. When Admiral Tirpitz spoke before the Reichstag in December 1897, he said that the German fleet had become a question of survival for the German Empire. With the construction of the Dreadnought, the German naval production was halted and then rapidly reorganized to begin producing modern Dreadnought battleships. The Germans no longer needed to bridge a gap of nearly 50 capital ships. They were only 1 behind, and that could be quickly changed. The Germans responded with the construction of the HMS Nassau, which could steam at 20 knots and carried 12 11-inch guns protected by 11-inch armor, with 4 total Nassau-class dreadnoughts operational by 1909. The first true German battlecruiser was launched in 1910, which would speed at a quick 25 knots and had 8 11-inch guns. In total, the Germans launched in 1909 4 Nassau-class battleships and the heavy modern cruiser Blucher, who was often treated and later reclassified as a battlecruiser. In 1910, they launched the first true battlecruiser, the Von der Tann. In 1911, 4 Helgoland-class battleships and 2 Moltke-class battlecruisers were launched. In 1912, 5 Kaiser-class battleships were commissioned, followed by the Seydlitz battlecruiser in 1913. In 1914, 4 Koenig-class battleships were commissioned, as well as 3 Derfflinger-class battlecruisers. This brought Germany's dreadnought fleet up to a total of 18 by the end of 1914, and a total of 7 battlecruisers also constructed of various classes, for a total of 25 modern capital ships. In response to the naval arms race, the British began a period of rapid construction project themselves. In 1906, the Dreadnought was commissioned, 2 years later followed by the 3 ships Invincible, Inflexible, and Indomitable of the Invincible-class battlecruisers. In 1909, 3 Bellerophon battleships were commissioned. In 1910, 3 St. Vincent-class battleships. 1911 saw 1 Neptune-class battleship, 2 Colossus-class battleships, and 3 Indefatigable-class battlecruisers commissioned, 2 of which were ordered by the Australian and New Zealand navies to serve as flagships. In 1912, 4 Orion-class battleships, 2 Lion-class battlecruisers, and 4 King George V-class battleships. In 1913, the battlecruiser Queen Mary was commissioned, and 1914 saw the largest shipbuilding increase in the British Navy at this point. 4 Iron Duke-class battleships, the Tiger-class battlecruiser, the Agincourt-class battleship, the Battleship Erin, Battleship Canada, and 5 Queen Elizabeth-class battleships. By the end of 1914, the Royal Navy had commissioned 30 dreadnoughts and 7 battlecruisers, for a total of 37 modern capital ships, with many more under construction over the following years. The Germans, by the start of World War I, had already been shifting their naval industrial sector away from the construction of battleships and towards submarines. During World War I, the German fleet would stay mostly in port, constricted by the far greater British naval superiority. Only one major naval engagement occurred between the German and British dreadnought fleets at the Battle of Jutland, in which the larger British fleet emerged victorious, but did take greater losses, almost twice the total tonnage lost of about 113,000 tonnage to 62,000. The German battle fleet would be so damaged that they would never again attempt a large-scale naval battle for the duration of the war. Battleships would maintain the predominant ship class for the next 30 years, until aircraft carriers became widely used in the Second World War. Thank you for watching my first video on the HMS Dreadnought and the naval arms race leading up to World War I. Next time, we'll be taking a look into Alfred Thayer Mahan and the keys to the world. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.